Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Matt D'Elia is Confused. This is Matt D'Elia, and this is a guest I was extremely interested in talking to. She was a little hesitant and wary, which is totally understandable because my guest is Rachel Dolezal, and she, if you have seen the documentary on Netflix, The Rachel Divide, or if you've been paying attention at all to the news in the last several years, she's been in it a lot, and people have had a lot to say about her. Almost all of it not good, at least the stuff that you're seeing. And I was really excited to talk to her. And the conversation, I think, went to really, really amazing places. And I'm really excited for you guys to hear it. I don't know what to say for anyone who doesn't know who Rachel Dolezal is. I guess get your head out of the sand. Because your head is in the sand. But yeah, I guess just a brief context. She was the center of a very massive controversy for saying she was or being in the NAACP and leading, I believe, the chapter in local chapter in Washington State of the NAACP and winning awards for various things. And then she was outed on camera as being as not actually being black. And that was sort of the thing that set everything off. She was dragged through the press. Anytime she was asked to be interviewed, people would promise her that they'd be nice and they just wanted to understand, and then they'd fucking drill her and stomp on her, which, look, if you think she deserves to be stomped on, fine. That's actually, to me, that's sort of neither here nor there, though. If you're going to tell her, you're going to let her explain herself, you should actually do that. And I wanted to do that. And because I'm interested in a lot of the things that her story sort of sparked in terms of the national conversation and what it brought out of people and her perspective on that. And in our email exchange, when she was sort of hesitant, I just told her, I was like, look, anything that people want to know about you, about all of that shit, they can Google it or they can watch the documentary. That's easily available to them. But I was interested in something a little bit more, possibly gaining more insight and learning more about her as a person, and her experience both before, during, and after the controversy. So think what you want. Actually, I don't think it really matters what you think, where you fall on the spectrum of whether you hate her or are confused by her or want to defend her or whatever it is. I think this is something worth listening to. And I'm excited for you guys to hear it. And that is enough out of me alone. Here is my conversation with Rachel Dolezal on Matt D'Elia is Confused. Matt D'Elia. Okay.
I'm Rachel Dolezal, and I'm a mother, an artist, an author, an activist, and an educator. And those are kind of different threads that have woven through my life for the last 20 plus years and continue to kind of drive who I am today.
Cool. All right. So we spoke a little bit via email, just as and I thought we could start just like broad, because I feel like so much has already, as we've discussed, so much has already been covered with you beaten to death, if you will, about, issues around you. But I just thought we could talk broadly and then talk about you and just open up a discussion and sort of like forget about that stuff as we've discussed via email. So if we wanted to just sort of like in your eyes, just sort of like defining race and racism as you see it, and then we can jump forward from there.
Sure. So yeah, I agree that a lot of things have been talked about. I don't know, I would just say that I don't know that things have been covered in terms of represented accurately
Sure, yeah.
about me, but I'm kind of tired of going around in circles on some of those questions. So yeah, I appreciate the fresh question, and I really think that race has kind of two definitions. There's the scientific one, and because I'm an academic and have taught at the university level 15 college courses, I really see it as scientifically, in an accurate sense, just to mean our common Homo sapien origins, like the human race. Like that's really what race means, right? Because the human race doesn't meet the zoological requirements for separate races. But in a socially constructed sense, and the way that people behave in America, race since colonial times has really meant a group of people sharing set or innate biological and behavioral traits. And that really, was birthed, as I said, out of the colonial era and the advent of white supremacy.
Right. So your broader scope of race is sort of, well, we all, and this is just sort of indisputable. So it's less an opinion than more of a point of view which is just, we all literally come from the same place. So what even is race if it's not, we're all the same? That's kind of where you're coming from.
Well, no, obviously we're not all the same.
Sure.
There's culture, there's gender, there's sexual orientation. I mean, there are a lot of things that we can talk about as far as differences. But when it comes to, does the 0.1% that accounts for hair texture, skin tone, or eye shape, or whatever, does that actually signal behavioral traits, IQ level, all of these things that have been like attached to all the stereotypes around the race worldview, because that's really the foundation of those ideas of what is a person and what is their worth based on how they were born or who their parents are. And I think that, definitely we're all members of really technically the Black human race, because we all go back to, a Black woman, and so that ancestry, though, has been not only ignored, but really avoided and undermined by this colonial mentality of, creating hierarchies. And I think when it comes to, you're talking about defining racism. Racism is very real, although it is enacting this fiction of different groups being, having these innate differences that we can predict and expect and then treat people accordingly. I think that racism is really, a behavior or a doing, an action of the race worldview, like seeing that, through the lens of a hierarchy, that there are groups that are superior and inferior, and we're then going to disrespect or judge or even enact violence upon groups who are seen as less than. And so I think, as human beings, that's really what racism is. Right.
And I want to get back to racism specifically, but I think, just one Google search and you can find 1,000 fucking trillion things that people have said about you and your identity, and everybody has an opinion. I mean, what do you, in your eyes, just what do you feel is the most important focus when it comes to race in America now, from your perspective?
Well, the reason why I spent 20 years of my life advocating for human rights and civil rights is because I really believe that the two key things that are most important today are undoing this race worldview, but also undoing racism by implementing justice, equity, and inclusion, not just for all groups, but for all individuals, because there's so much nuance and variety within each group, and so you might have that intersectionality between maybe somebody who identifies as like, a Black lesbian who's disabled or whatever, like what aspect of your identity is the most powerful in kind of curbing your life chances and opportunities. How does a person feel marginalized in terms of, just kind of moving in the world and interacting with others. And I think that sometimes one or more of those categories can kind of come to the surface as being, and that's why people say like, I'm going to advocate for LGBT rights. And that's like in my case, I feel like even though I am bisexual, always have been bisexual, but it's like, I don't necessarily put that at the forefront of my activism just because I really believe that the race worldview and the injustices and oppressions facing my children and people who I love are like the critical emergency issue right now, as opposed to my private life as a bisexual woman. But
sure.
So I think that like my focus has always been on justice, and equity. And when I was president of the NAACP in the local chapter here, I really focused on the developing 5 committees for game changer issues for, undoing racism in, and or like promoting equity, justice, and inclusion. And you can look at it either way, like we are going to, undo inequity and injustice, and, or we can, you can look at it as we're going to implement inclusion and equity and justice. So those 5 key areas that I think are the key areas right now today, with whether it's democratic debates, the, political process, whatever, are political representation, criminal justice and public safety, education, economic development, or just the economic opportunities, and then healthcare. Those are kind of like the 5 big areas that racism has been institutionalized in America.
Right. It's an interesting distinction you make between undo and implement. How it, even though it might, if let's say if both went the right way, the result would be the same ideally. But do you see a difference, and is one sort of like a clearer path to you between undoing and implementing?
Well, I think you have to do it. You have to kind of do some work of undoing as like pre-implementation. Like you have to do some preliminary work there first in reducing prejudices, in coming to an understanding of like, the basic, we are the human race, like da-da-da-da-da. Like just kind of like get some starting points so that people can agree and then start acting on the basis of those shared values. Right. Because I think if you don't really undo prejudices, you reduce the prejudices or undo racism first, then sometimes it's harder to implement equity and inclusion because people are still kind of, trying to go to their separate groups and, trying to decide who belongs and who doesn't belong and all that kind of stuff. And so you can't really move past that. If people are still caught up in that activity, then there's no way that you can really, bring the full meaning of inclusion and equity forward.
Right.
I see a lot of that in identity politics and just in the political and even just news media chatter, it's like there's a consistent attempt or effort being made to kind of stoke the fire of the binary, like black versus white versus, Democrat versus Republican, like the whole, like, go to your corners, we're going to fight.
Right. Yeah.
Instead of, how can we identify like some human areas where we have shared values and goals, and then work toward, because I think that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, I'm racist.
Right.
But they hold private prejudices about groups, or, judge individuals based on those prejudices, or enact microaggressions. I think that, and that's something that we talk a lot about in academia, is like the kind of, like touching somebody's hair, or just these subtle little daily things that, comments made, or scooting away from someone, or locking your door when somebody walks by, or just little things that, it wasn't a violent act and you didn't fly the flag of white nationalism, but you made it clear that, it's us and them, or it's the other group, or the other, person. And I think that can have a cumulative effect psychologically that can be, similarly damaging over time to a more direct act of racism.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of reinforcing of things that are not helpful. I mean, you mentioned the media stoking flames, and it's so based around. I mean, it's like clickbait, basically. People. The idea is that they're trying to get you to click on something because there's conflict in it and tension, and you're much more likely to click on that than you are to click on something that is either more complex or even more peaceful as an interaction. I mean, I've just even seen that with you. I mean, even if somebody says, hey, come talk to me, it's going to be an open dialogue. I mean, I feel like there's still this contentiousness that they're after, really, and it gets to that sort of binary thing you're talking about.
Well, and I have never agreed to an interview that at the outset they're like, oh, we want to just ambush you and fight with you and put you on the spot and make you try and box you in, and nobody ever said that. Everybody's always like, we just want you to give you an opportunity to share your story, and then as soon as you get there, there is the ambush, there is and when there's not, like when there's an open discussion like what we're having right now, then sometimes that particular interview will just kind of get buried. Like a lot of the more thoughtful, more nuanced interviews, because I've done about 60 interviews, nobody's ever even watched them. At the top of the Google searches, at the top of the YouTube searches are always the more, like dramatic, kind of like you said, adversarial.
Right.
And I think that really the whole thing back in 2015 was really a manufactured frenzy over like, is she black or white? Like, oh my God, and that it was just like created and just stoked like for, hundreds of articles and even books, and like all this stuff is just like, it just got poked and prodded, and really it was the kind of like poking the hornet's nest of race that's, like a very contentious issue and has hundreds of years of pain and, like all of this feeling and emotions around that issue. So I really feel like a lot of that ended up being a conversation not even about me.
Right.
It was just really about how people felt about the topic, or people expressing their personal pain or projecting their personal pain onto me. But just, I became kind of like a punching bag that was useful because a lot of people wanted to get their feelings out.
Right.
And from both sides, and it became like, not taboo to take the gloves off and just, go in on me, for anybody, So it was just, I think that a lot of that, though, not, take me out of the picture, just in even the political commentary is just constantly poked and prodded when it comes to race, or, any kind of difference, like sexual orientation or gender, or, and it's hard for people to just see somebody as, body, spirit, and mind. Like it's hard for people to kind of like go, well, let's talk about this person's mindset and let's talk about their heart and their intentions. Nobody cares. Let's talk about what they look like. Let's talk about, this thing over here that we can argue about. So
it's so true. It's really interesting too. I mean, the just even the idea that, the reach out to you is like, let's have a dialogue, and then the enacting of it once it comes along, the actual interview, when it's happening, it's just a different story. I find that, I mean, it just is, that's just fucking dishonest, just as much as anything else that's dishonest. So I don't see how that is benefiting really anybody, but also I saw the documentary that was made about you, and it just, it was strange and sort of particularly upsetting to see, you're literally just one person in the world, and everybody wants to talk to you because of this thing that they're sensationalizing, whatever it is. And then I'm curious, not to deviate too off topic, but just if we could talk about it real quick, the aftermath of those things. Like if you go on like the Today Show and they say, we just want to hear your story, and then they railroad you, what happens like right after that? Is there any acknowledgement of like, I'm sorry it went that way, or are they just like, we got what we wanted, now you can go?
No.
Not at all.
Yeah, there's just, it's just like, whiskey. And actually, when I did the Today Show, I only agreed to that initial interview with Matt Lauer because I was a big fan of Melissa Harris Perry, who was on MSNBC at that point. And I said, if I do the Today Show, I get an interview with her, because I knew she would be more academic. And she kind of brought up the, like, instead of transracial, maybe like, you're trans black. Like maybe that should be like vocabulary we start using, like cis black and trans black. And, like she had like a more academic approach to the topic. But I feel like, I did Today Show, MSNBC with Melissa Harris Perry, and then I did Savannah Guthrie, all like just back to back. So they were just like in one interview going right into the next one. There was no conversation about, of course I kept hoping like, okay, well maybe the next one will be better, but
right. Yeah.
I'm like, wait, that was 5 minutes,
Yeah.
But to your point of, is it dishonest? Absolutely, it's dishonest. Meanwhile, everybody's, pointing the finger, calling me dishonest, but it's like, you guys just dated me to be here, and it would be poor form to, try and point that out.
Right.
It's just not my style to be super confrontational, because I kind of just am a humble person by nature. Like I don't like to fight. I like to, kind of withdraw and reflect.
Right.
So when people are kind of coming at me, my style is usually to just like let them have their say. And then, when I feel like people are actually listening to my voice, maybe I will start talking more, or getting more verbal about things. But so anyway, but they do that obviously for money. I mean, that was the most viewed Today Show episode in the entire history of the Today Show.
Oh my God.
My interview with Matt Lauer. And Matt Lauer is making what, $26 million a year, and then of course he's probably banging his turn, before he talked to me. But his like condescending attitude and just all these questions about like how can you say you're black or this or that, and it's just the whole thing seemed very hypocritical.
Yeah.
In the moment, I'm like, you're pointing the finger, but let's just. But okay, and it was kind of just a lot of surviving the moment for me and my kids and my sister. Through all that, I really was hoping to kind of set the record straight, rebuild my reputation, like get things back on track to us kind of going back to our lives. And that did not happen.
Yeah, sure.
Because everybody just like drowned me out,
right.
Like just kept shouting about everything. And I just kind of was like, well, I guess nobody's listening to me. Let me just stop talking and write my book.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Somebody will read that.
It's interesting. I mean, just the hypocrisy on display with someone like Matt Lauer, This like powerful guy who abuses people behind the scenes has you on to fucking railroad you. Like it's a strange system that I find it weird that you kind of alluded to this. Everybody sort of, it's like they wanted to talk about this shit anyway, and they used you and your story as a way into that, and what without realizing or possibly without giving a shit, sort of like dragged you around behind them and fucked you up and had no care about that because you were their vehicle to getting their point across.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why I say it wasn't. A lot of times I just kind of had to take a breath and be like, "This isn't even about me."
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
The things that like the assumptions and the 10th degree that people went to just like assume everything in a blanket sense about my life, just because they saw, two white parents on TV saying they're white like 100 times, and then to just assume that was actually the race worldview in action, right there.
Right.
My entire life, had led up to a certain point of I was winning awards for my teaching and mentoring. The months before this, I was winning awards for my leadership in the community, for the advocacy work, the effectiveness of my advocacy work. In very specific ways, and then all of a sudden, just wait, her parents look like this. Let's see, like everything about her is now called into question.
Yeah, that's actually I mean, that's one of the first things I would think about when I would think about you. It's like I don't know if it's like looking at a whole story and then only focusing on like this one point. And I think it speaks to, again, what you were saying. It's like people just want to talk about what they want to talk about. And they're not interested in the rest of you and even any potentially positive things you've done because nobody's going to click on that is what they're thinking. And they might not even be wrong, which is its own sad thing. But B, they don't care. They don't care about the good things you've done, which I find like one of the darkest elements of the whole thing, They really only care about the fucking the way that they can talk about their own shit. It's like when you're talking to somebody and you can see in their face
and the perception.
Yeah.
Right. Like the perception of something being bad is as powerful as a bad thing itself. Because people can just go on and on and on. And I think that a lot of times, even with the court system, it's like, a lot of people are really presumed guilty before being proven innocent. It's not the innocent until proven guilty thing.
Sure, yeah.
It's like if it's the media, then everybody's looking at you sideways and assuming that is, that you're guilty as charged. So pretty much just like the element of doubt is so powerful. And once you're accused of something, you're always suspected of it. Everybody's going to then be looking through the lens of questioning everything you've done in the past and everything you will ever do in the future.
Yeah.
And that's extremely devastating. As for me as a person, that's been the hardest thing to accept, that I have to, continue to live with. That everything I do is going to be questioned, judged, and scrutinized with this huge element of doubt and suspicion that wasn't there prior.
Right.
And now, and I don't feel like I deserve that, but it's just the case, and so like moving forward, then it's really difficult as an individual once you've been kind of blasted, because the media sees that, they could literally ignore every single positive thing I've ever done or ever will do, and just look for anything that could be twisted or shaped into a sensational, item. Like just go out of the, like when my son Langston was born, as you saw in the documentary, I named him Langston Atticus, and TMZ. Somebody actually sold a baby photo to TMZ off my Facebook, which then I had to shut down my personal Facebook. because I didn't know. I thought I had eliminated all my friends down to who I could trust, but apparently not. And then I was just so frustrated. And so they were like, she gives her son the blackest name ever, and tag Langston Hughes Foundation, and like, are you offended and everything? And they basically, had a perfect response to it. They're like, no, that's, like Langston Hughes is all about, race relations and everything. So I think that's actually perfect. And so then they just that whole story just disappears.
Yeah, it goes away once no one's pissed. I mean, that's so telling. Yeah.
And it's like the national, you can even Google NAACP response to Rachel Dolezal in 2015. The national president of the NAACP put out a very thoughtful, we stand by Rachel, and her advocacy work has been beyond reproach. We stand by her. We don't care who her parents are, whether she's black or white. That has no, significance to us, because the NAACP was founded by both white and black people. And, we care about, but she's enduring a private legal matter, family matter right now. So we want to give her privacy, or want to give her space for that. And everybody just ignored that. The media never was like, oh, the NAACP supports Rachel.
Yeah. I mean,
it was just oh, let's find these few little members who haven't ever been that involved, and let's interview them over and over, and get all the juicy stuff on why they don't like her.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, your perspective, your work with the NAACP, and since the fallout since then, as maybe target is the wrong word, but that's the word that comes to mind. I feel like that almost brings your perspective as it almost brings it full circle, in the sense that you've been on the front lines of fighting racism, and you've been a target. I'm curious if afterwards, the kinds of racism that have possibly come your way, I'm curious about that, because in the wake of what happened, it's you can get it from any side about anything, because there can be white people who are mad at you for the way you think of the way you defended black people, and they might call you a traitor. And it's obviously black people have their problem with you. It's I'm curious as to the sort of, in a personal way, the different angles at which, I mean, to use just the punching bag term, at which you've been attacked. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think that through it all, I've really had to just stay very clear on who I am. And Malcolm X's oldest daughter reached out to me back at the end of 2015. She was just kind of don't forget who you were in May of 2015. This all popped off in June. And, just that statement and a lot of her encouragement then since that year has just been meaningful, because I haven't changed. I mean, I do remember who I was then, who I have always been, who I still am today. And so I kind of have had to reinforce that, because in the face of both sides, which a lot of people who are mixed or whatever, get that, you're not black enough, you're not white enough.
Yeah.
And you kind of just get caught in this in-between space of just trying to fight for your own existence, to justify your own existence for the world. Or if you feel an allegiance with one side versus the other, then it's kind of you have to justify that constantly.
Right.
And so it's not something that just me, there are other people who have dealt with that to some degree and in some way, just probably not on an international, level necessarily in the same way. But I think that the consistency has been that I've always been hated by white nationalists, the KKK and the birthers and the Aryan Nations and the neo-Nazis in North Idaho, they hated me the whole time. I've gotten, especially from white nationalists in particular, they were so happy to to see this whole takedown in 2015. So that remained, their hate remained consistent, and I think that they took off the gloves maybe even a little bit more because in public spaces, social media, they used every slur for racial slur, gender slur, anything they could think of to basically trash or diss me.
Yeah.
But the surprise thing was that then, what would be considered kind of a woke Black feminist sector or voice, was in agreement with them.
Yeah.
And I was like, how can, like, how can that voice, like, but it was really based on, I felt and still feel, kind of like a misrepresentation, like this caricature that was made of me, and this, like, this is who this person is, but it really wasn't. It isn't who I am, but it's like, this caricature that was created. Then we can then unleash all of that pain because this caricature reminds us of racism, of pain, of cultural appropriation, of all of these things that we fight every day, all those microaggressions, like all of the pain from history. I mean, everything can just be like dumped on her.
Yeah.
And so I think that, that was very hard. But at the same time, I also had that balanced out with, which the Rachel Dolezal film didn't show, because they cut a dozen Black voices that were, locally, that were actually talking, on my behalf, like that were supportive.
Right.
All of that, like, I feel like just the film direction was like a heartstrings piece, and it was kind of, me versus the world. It really wasn't the Rachel Dolezal because they didn't show more of the pro Rachel, and I think that Netflix and the film director were just kind of, partly afraid to, like, they didn't want it to be seen as them making a pro Rachel film.
I'm sure, yeah.
So they veered a little bit, they leaned into the opposition more than I feel like was even accurate in terms of who they filmed, because they filmed for 2 years, and I'm like, still to this day, voices of support, specifically of Black women, have not been heard. And I think that's also, in a sense, that whole process has been, a thing of stereotyping. Like, the media has stereotyped that Black women will be against me.
Right.
Therefore, they only feature Black women who are against me. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And I think that that's happened in media a lot. Like, oh, this group, we are going to think that they're going to vote this way, they're going to do this, but then we're going to just blanket assume, X, Y, Z, and then and only show or feature the people who kind of validate our assumptions. So
yeah. I mean,
that was hard, but I do hear from a lot of Black women, specifically from either mixed or light-skinned Black women, who kind of, share their stories of being caught in between and being, like, accepted in the Black community until it's convenient to, be kind of excluded, and, like, you're not really Black, you don't really get the full experience because you're not, that dark, or you're not, your hair isn't this, and some of those stories, like, there is pain there that is equally valid to pain. On the other side, I think pain is pain, and we're all trying to heal and coexist and be loved. And so, it's been an interesting journey, just kind of being the, depository or whatever of all the feelings incoming. Any day that somebody watches the Netflix film for the first time, like, I get a DM.
I'm sure they run the gamut.
And it's like brand new for them, and it's like, but kind of like keeping a level of, like, okay, that's not just something that has to stay fresh in my mind, but it's like it just happened for somebody in Australia who just watches it and didn't even see the news,
Yeah, totally. I mean, you talking about how, like, it was a weird unification of, like, these, like, horrible white nationalist people and this Black feminist groups as well, sort of like, uniting in that. It just underscores this identity politics thing. And I'm curious as to, I mean, it's such a phrase that's thrown around so much now, identity politics. And I think it means different things to different people, but I'm curious as to your take on or experience of it out in the world. I mean, especially because it's being thrown at you often, whether you want it or not, and whether people think you brought it upon yourself or not. It is thrust at you from all different angles, and I'm curious as to your take on that. Yeah.
Well, that phrase I feel like has been most often used, or I've heard it most often from the right.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, it's just identity politics, and you just wanted to, people assuming then that there was some kind of advantage,
right?
That I incurred, like, I wouldn't have identified or affiliated this way if it wasn't to my advantage, because that's what people usually do. Like, let's just not even assume for a minute that this could have just been how she feels, and that's who she is, and she can't change that, so that's how she, But when it comes to that phrase from the right, it's like, okay, people assuming I benefited from affirmative action, and I did all, which I never did because I never had a full-time tenure track position. And, contract positions are not, don't go through the EEOC affirmative action funnel. Anyway, so just people kind of like assuming all this stuff, like, oh, it's to your advantage if you can be, like, you're special if you can be non-white in America or whatever. And that was based on just some ignorance.
Yeah.
Like, actually, white women benefit from affirmative action more than any other demographic. But people don't want to talk about that. Like, we want to talk about some of the inaccuracies of the assumptions about, quote, identity politics. But I think that people assume, like, oh, they're just that person's just trying to be cool. And like Elizabeth Warren was called by Charlemagne the God, was like, oh, you're the original Rachel Dolezal or something. And then that was trending on number one topic, trending on Twitter that day. And, it's just like people immediately assume that it's a bad thing, because typically, it has historically, there were a lot of like infiltrators and people trying to game the system for their own advantage in different ways. But most of the time that was done by white passing, by crossing the color line in the other direction. Like, I'm going to gain privilege because I can pass as white. Like, I'm just going to sort of, Alison Hobbs wrote the book A Chosen Exile, which just describes the entire history of racial passing in America. And, it went that direction. So to go the other way, I think people then just, their jerk reaction is like, oh, that must have benefited. That person wouldn't have done that if it wasn't to their financial advantage or their whatever.
Right.
And I think that from the left, identity politics, which isn't usually talked about with that phrase, it's more just talked about in group by group. Like, you should be proud to be bisexual or pansexual or whatever, non-binary gender, whatever it is, that, like, you should be proud to have become so self-aware that you can correctly label all of your categories.
Right.
Like, that's a goal, because then, you can fully express that to the world. You don't have to be repressed. You don't have to hide it. You can show up as fully yourself at your job and in society. And I think that kind of more celebratory sense really is more of, when it comes to the race world, it's more of like a cultural thing. So when we talk about culture or ethnicity, there's usually like a sense of pride and belonging, and like we, share this kind of food, or we listen to this kind of music, or we, we know how to do this or that, and it's like a shared lifestyle. So people kind of rally around that. So there's more like pride and positivity around culture typically than there is around race, because race is like, oh, that, that group, like those people, like, yeah.
Right.
And you start thinking about all the things that you think bad about white people, or all the things that you think bad about, like Trump just said, this last week, like, do you love your country or Hispanics more or something?
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, or was it yesterday? I don't know. But anyways, it's that kind of thinking of, well, that's a false dichotomy. Like, why is that even a choice between those two things? But
I mean, he's always manufacturing
when you talk about,
division.
Right. Because, like, let's talk about what kind of food you like to eat, what kind of music you like to listen to, and how you raise your kids, and like that then becomes like a positive conversation that can kind of unite people versus like, what's your level of melanin, and what's your hair texture, and do you think that this person has a right to do this or that, and so
yeah, it is weird. It the more you get down to like the very like unchangeable the more like physical attribute lockdown like category stuff, I think, is when people start to get a little bit in trouble or liable to sort of like be wield it as a weapon more than anything else, and I
right.
It's interesting to I mean, interesting for to put it mildly, your experience of sort of like uniquely having gotten it from all sides, really, and I find that, because it is true that you hear the phrase identity politics so often from the right as this like dismissive, oh, they're just playing their identity politics over there on the left. But I find it interesting that it's not like they're not doing the same fucking thing with their thing.
Right.
I mean, there are the Republicans in the House and Senate that wield that like it's fucking just as much of a weapon as anything else,
Right. The whole idea that America, was once great and we need to go back to that or whatever is also a form of identity politics in a sense, What, we need to go back to sexism, racism, like larger degrees of that, the historical oppressions, or, the white male-driven world. Is that what you want to go back to? Because
I mean, MAGA
I don't hear much about women or,
MAGA is basically, I mean, Make America Great Again is like, if you're not a white guy, that's just not for you, like it's not.
Well, straight white guy.
Right. Straight white guy, like that's
probably straight rich white guy.
It helps. It totally helps. Yeah. It's just
non-disabled.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Checking all the boxes. I mean, if you're that, then like MAGA is for you, and it's barely even coded or cloaked. It's just like all you have to do is think about it for a second. Who would that be good for? Making America Great Again. Who would that be good for? And that's one very narrow group that's historically tried to remain as narrow as it can and gain power for itself. And it's interesting, and it's weird that's, I don't want to say it's glossed over, because Trump and his ties to white nationalism or whatever, his stoking the flames of that, that's not like nobody knows that. But specifically Make America Great Again is uniquely odd to me in how much it slips by. The idea of how directly sort of only good for one very narrow group of people that's as identity politicsy as anything could ever be. It's just like it's using this buffer term that you can put on a hat,
That like a country club.
Yeah, totally. It's like a code that you can use in public and say it without like, feeling racist or whatever, But yeah, it is interesting that it's just as, I mean, I find this to be true often, the people that are, whoever's shouting against something, they're liable to be doing it or to be the greatest offender of that, And I see that so much on the right with this idea of you guys, as in you guys on the left, are playing identity politics, but you're playing identity politics so much that it's on your fucking hat at rallies. You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
it's very hypocritical.
But people will feel safe, like they'll still feel like it's coded, like their mask is still on.
Right. Yeah.
They feel secure with that because it's not like they're not flying a Confederate flag on their hat, but they could be,
Totally.
or a neo-Nazi, swastika or something. But it's not that. Like we would never do that,
Mm-hmm.
But this is okay because it's just a good old, traditional values
Right.
or however you want. Like all those things are kind of code word for, which is why undoing racism, undoing the race worldview is really important as a starting point in education and politics and, criminal justice and all this stuff, because a lot of people, some people have intuition, like they're like, oh, that just doesn't sound right or that doesn't feel right, but they don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
So if they can't articulate why historically, then they're not really armed to fight it, or they're not armed to defend that feeling, to support their intuition. And I don't want to support that, but I can't really argue against it because I don't really know why I don't support it.
Right.
It just seems a little off. So I think it's important to educate, and if people know that traditional values or make America great again, or just, let's go back to the good old days, and all these kind of phrases are really, kind of trigger points for people on the other side hearing those. Like that's a red flag. Like that's a warning sign.
Right.
It's like if in your relationship and, your partner does something that's like, ooh, that's controlling, like that might be, warning sign of unhealthy relationship in the future or whatever.
Right. Totally.
So
Yeah.
you take note of those things just because you have to be aware. As a mother, I have to be aware of these code words in society because I want to know who my kids are safe being around, and also, kind of take the temperature of the society or the room of kind of like, okay, what dangers might they be facing now, and then try to do my best to either educate them about those or protect them from them or whatever.
Right.
So I think that's definitely people on the other side are kind of like, ooh, make America.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of us felt like that when we first heard the phrase. Like, what?
Right. Totally. Yeah.
Seriously?
It just seems so obvious. I mean, it's just as obvious as when I see Trump talk, I'm like, well, that's a fucking sociopath. He can't possibly be president. And then a year later, he's elected. And I'm just like, am I the fucking crazy one? Like, what's happening?
Right.
But speaking of Trump, yeah, I mean, I'm curious, being someone who's been in the spotlight, who has black sons, who has been in the spotlight really from the Obama era into the Trump era rather, the temperature out there, like how much of a shift has there been in your eyes? Because it's like hard for me to even remember what it was like when Obama was president, and it's like, because it's this is like a bludgeon to the head every day with Trump, just stoking some fucking flame or saying some stupid thing or whatever it is, that it's hard to even access those memories. But to you, just being at the center of the conversation about race, and it's been such a hot button thing in different ways and from different mouths at different times in the last 6 years especially. I'm curious as to if there's been a shift through your eyes or anything like that.
Well, I think that there are certain lightning rods that in certain moments that spark kind of, it's almost like it reveals what people were really thinking all along. And Obama's election was one of those, and Trump's election was another one of those.
Yeah.
And my whole, crazy explosion thing in 2015 was another one of those, and so I feel like, and to some extent, Caitlyn Jenner's coming out was one of those, where you start to see who your real friends are on Facebook or lose friends or whatever, because you're like, oh, really? They feel like that about this issue?
Right.
And so when Obama was elected, I was living in North Idaho, unfortunately, at the time, and I became the the director of education for the Human Rights Education Institute that same month and year. So like right when Obama was elected, I was named director of that institute, and the institute only exists because there was the Southern Poverty Law Center sued the Aryan Nations, their international headquarters and compound in North Idaho, shut them down, bankrupted them, et cetera. And out of that was born this institute that was supposed to be a preventative measure so that type of racism and white supremacy never, festered in that area again.
Right.
So when I got that position, it was kind of like this local reaction to Obama's election, against me. And that's kind of where in the local sense it started, because the Aryan Nations were like, she's a bastard. Like people just, looked at me for 5 seconds and saw that I had this agenda for like implementing Black history programs in schools and doing all this cultural work. And so they're like, oh, she's, they call me a bastard child. Obama's a bastard child, which they consider like anybody mixed.
Oh.
It's not have a soul, it's like, okay, if you're like Black, you marry Black, for generations, like you stay on your own side. But under the Aryan Nations worldview, Eve mated with Satan, or the serpent, to produce all the non-white races. Even Adam and Eve were white under their worldview. So then, all the non-white races like really don't have a soul. And so when, like, it's not wrong to kill somebody.
Yeah.
Like they literally said these things about in context of Obama and me, when talking to the media, like it wouldn't be wrong to kill her or him because blah, blah, blah. So that was kind of, a lot of the stuff came to the forefront when he was elected. And it's not like people just became racist that day or just started feeling a certain kind of way about, prejudice. It's like these things are festering. And that was a big lightning rod.
Yeah.
Because it's like we have a Black president, which, was in and of itself a little bit of a revelation because Obama hadn't even identified himself as Black previously. It was like he was mixed and, he had a white mom, he was raised, but,
right.
like he kind of said he was more white culturally and all these other things. And then it was like, no, he's Black, period. So for like in a local sense, they said their nation said that their phone was like ringing off the hook the next day after he was elected. And so it's kind of like this uprising of this reaction against his election. At the same time, there was this huge sense of hope.
Yeah.
And, on the other side, like it was like, what? And so my son, Franklin, came home from school. He's in second grade. I remember clearly, like the day after Obama was elected, he came home and he said, Mom, I said the Pledge of Allegiance today for the first time. If my first response was like, what have you been doing this whole time? How did your teacher not let you say the pledge? Like, because I know that they're supposed to. And he's like, oh, I just was kind of saying blah, 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 but my mouth was moving, but I never said the pledge until today. And I was like, well, why today? And he said, because Obama was elected, and I feel like the flag might stand for something other than genocide and slavery.
Wow, that's fucking incredible. Wow.
For a second grader, it was like, that summed it up.
Yeah.
So it summed up that hope, that kind of optimism of like, well, anything's possible now. Maybe we can move into a post-racial society. Maybe we can. And then, of course, came all of the ugliness of racism, directed from the right, towards Obama, and the slurs and, the ugliness against Michelle and
the birther movement alone.
Which came out of North Idaho, basically. So, it's just that was. I noticed both things. I guess, as I said, it's like a lightning rod. Mm-hmm. And then with what happened with me, I noticed kind of some of the same, like this reaction of street, like it was either love or hate.
Yeah.
And then with Trump, it's either love or hate.
Yeah.
All over again.
Right.
And so, but with Trump, I feel like it's been an emboldening of, racism and the white nationalist ideas and those hierarchies, those old views of superiority, and not just with white versus black or white versus Hispanic or whatever, but also with male versus female. I mean, there's been a lot of sexism that hasn't necessarily been talked about as much in his administration, but who he appoints and just like the vibe of his presidency, I feel like has taken us back.
Yeah.
Which I guess was his goal.
Yeah.
Because that's what slogan is, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's interesting. It kind of, I mean, because I'm in LA, and if anywhere else in the country, it's probably New York or another city. My experience of Obama was like, well, fucking everybody loves Obama, because everyone in my world did. And so that was, I mean, look, Hillary was the candidate that she was. So you can't eliminate that from the conversation, because she was, I think, in so many ways, a uniquely positioned to lose that race, regardless of who her opponent was. But putting that aside, I wouldn't say it was it wasn't not known to me. It wasn't known to the degree that it was true. I didn't realize the degree to which there was this unbelievably sort of potent, sort of racially motivated disdain for him, and that sort of almost created a clear path to Trump and his base. And Trump, obviously, I mean, well before he entered the race, was engaged in that. I mean, you could easily argue that his jump into the political sphere was from the birther platform, and so there's a direct line from anti-Obama, racially based anti-Obama stuff to Trump's ascendance, and it's
and I really felt that in where Idaho's a 75 or more % Republican state. I mean, it's very white conservative. I mean, even I live in I'm 30 miles from, I'm right across the border in Washington State now, and have been for years. But it's the same area. It's 2% black here. I mean, so in this kind of an area, you really feel that pulse. You feel that wave of entitlement and empowerment. I don't know if I'd use the word empowerment, but that sense of, we're on top with the. With Trump's election, whereas with Obama's election, you felt that uprising of anger. But at the same time, you kind of keep track of your own feelings. And like I said, Franklin's feelings coming home from school, with, so just seeing both sides, I guess I've kind of always been sort of in this in-between space of just kind of having a really clear view of both sides. And it's kind of strange place to live because it's very nomadic and very kind of lonely at times. But at the same, in the same sense, there's perspective there because you don't have that sense I'm just on this side solidly and always will. Everybody will always defend my space on that side. There's no place for me really solidly other than in my own heart and soul. I know who I am and I'm not going to afford anybody to tell me who I am. But, beyond that in society, there's kind of a sense of being blown around with the wind as far as how people want to treat you. So, I mean, I just from the outside looking in, I mean, it makes me want to ask you, what, I guess, people talk about this idea of safe spaces, which is a whole other conversation I want to get into. But the phrase comes to mind in this, where it's where do you feel safe? Not literally where, but on that, I don't know, now, it's sort of you've moved on and you've found this sort of, as you're describing it, this sort of place within you to say, well, I know who I am. So that people on that side can say this, people on that side can say that, but I know.
was that like an arrival to that for you, or was that sort of always there and it was being blown around in the wind, but you always knew where you were, kind of thing?
Yeah, it's definitely always been there. I think as a child, it was really hard to navigate like what was, I was getting all this input that something was wrong with me, and so I kind of, just in my formative years, I felt like there was constantly like something I could never fully atone for. Like I couldn't sufficiently change who I was to ever fit in with, my parents and that whole like the whole like white culture, whatever. Like I just couldn't really fit. I could never do enough. I could never be enough. I tried very hard to, not get punished or whatever. But literally, I mean, I had, demons cast out of me. I mean, supposedly, all these kind of things. Like, so those experiences as a kid, feeling like I'm just wrong. Like I just was born wrong. And then, over time, what I did is I just moved all of what fed my soul into a very internal space, so that I read books and I sought out things and I, created art. That all was very private.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when I was able to then relocate to Mississippi for college and really became a part of the Black community in West Jackson and had a lot of affirmation, like there's no way that you're white, like clearly you're not white, like, your parents might have said, but clearly your mom had an affair or something, because like white people don't do X, Y, Z, and you do X, Y, Z, you have rhythm and you have this and that, blah, blah, blah. And like the art, you can see your spirit in it. And it's just, so I had all this kind of like affirmation, like you do belong, like the feedback, like not only did I feel at home, but I was also being told, yes, this is your home. You're accepted. You're included here. Like this is where you belong. And then really kind of, then going to Howard University and then kind of regressing, I would say a little bit, I had to pull back during my marriage, which was right before I went to Howard. I, was married, and that was a whole an unhealthy marriage and everything. But anyway, so I kind of like my identity or the marriage wasn't a safe space, so I kind of had to pull back into myself.
Sure, yeah.
And then after the divorce, 5 years later, I was able to kind of, express and expand and nurture those parts of me, kind of bring them slowly out into the open a little bit. And then in 2015, 13 years later, is like, bam, right back into you are all you have. Like you're the only one. Like it's kind of scary almost to feel like you're the only one that understands yourself.
Yeah.
But there have been moments where I've felt that, and I've had to, just support myself internally, emotionally, and be strong enough to also support the people that I love. And I would say that, my safe space now it's myself, it's my kids, and it's a very small space, a few trusted friends, that have been consistently there, but I don't feel safe in public.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of like emotionally, I am very, I have a lot of walls. I haven't dated since 2015.
Yeah.
That's scary to me. I mean, it's just, I really do feel a lot of anxiety because every single day I will have to delete people still every single day.
Yeah.
I have to delete some kind of comment, some kind of message about, how I'm not, I'm not okay. I'm not acceptable.
Yeah. 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 Well put. I mean, you said something, and in tandem with having seen the documentary just before I let you go, I'm curious. I know your parents were extremely religious and sort of, I don't need to put adjectives on them. You know what your parents were. You mentioned demons being cast out. Was that because of your struggles with identity? Like, what specifically was that? Like, you are not because. Tell me, like, what was that?
Yeah, well, they wouldn't necessarily put it that way, but it was for behaviors that came natural to me. For example, one example would be, and a lot of it, I think they just thought of as gender stuff. But like I had sort of an inclination to dance. Like it was not okay to move your body to music because that was just an essential of the devil. Like if you're a female, you're a virgin until you're married. You do, and in the midst of this whole craziness, like these are the parents that support, our older brother who molested me and my little sister, the only two girls in the household. So it's like you're kind of being told all these things that that you're feeling that are wrong or that you're doing that are wrong as a woman, and you're supposed to submit to the man. But then there's no accountability for the men.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
What about what they're supposed to be doing? So I think in the midst of that, there was a lot of rejection on the basis of, like, from the, my first drawings to how I, to dancing, to just things that I would just be like, I'm just going to, I didn't think about it. It's just something that I was doing.
Yeah, when you're a kid.
But then the feedback was like, what in the world? Like, what are you doing? Like, why did you do that? That's so weird. That's so wrong. That's so off. Like, that's not normal. And then kind of the, like, redirection, like, you need to be normal. You need to do things this way because that's the right way, the Christian way, etc. So, I had definitely a lot of that repression and even abuse and things that kind of made me feel like I had to go inside to survive. Like that was the only place that I felt like I could know or be in touch with my feelings was just internally. Because if I expressed it in any way, that was not going to be okay. That was not going to be understood. And it was a very, it was Pentecostal, Christian fundamentalist type of upbringing in, of course, Montana, which, like, if you read my book, it was like a small town. It was
right
because like population approximately 3,000 people were white.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
This is basically like a very homogenous group. To just feel like so out of place there. And people have kind of been like, oh, it must, it's probably some past life memory that it's probably this, probably that. I really honestly don't know and don't care. I mean, I've taken 3 DNA tests. I've done that stuff that people kind of do to search for who they are.
Right.
And nothing has really ever changed or made me question myself, because at the end of the day, I still have to be me if I'm going to stay alive. Like if I'm going to live in my body and live this life that I have, I can't, at 41 years old, I can't be repressed again like I was at 12. Like all those pictures that people like spread, it's like, oh yeah, that was when I was 12. You want to do that against like the picture of me. I've been braiding my hair for 20 years. Like, what do you want me to do now? Like not braid my hair?
Right.
And, braid everybody else's hair. And like, that's what I do with hair. And, like all of a sudden you want to, like, oh, you should switch up and go be like, when you're in Montana and you're 12 years old. And it's like, no, I don't think so. I can't. If I was to go back to that lifestyle, to me, that would be death, like that would be the internal death.
Yeah.
Because I have been able to own and nurture who I am in my spirit, in my heart, and in my mind. And what makes sense to me, I have to live by that. Like, I can't stop living by that. I mean, and I think that's why I think that, like, my kids really know, they know me probably better than anybody else, of course, because they see me all the time. But I think that, like, a lot of this they hadn't even really thought through.
Yeah.
Like when a reporter had asked, like a French reporter had asked Franklin, like, do you feel like you have a white side and a black side? Or, how do you justify, and Franklin was like, hell no, I'm black, like,
right.
Like, they haven't really thought of, like, oh, we're raised in some kind of, like, interracial household or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So,
the kid, as a
we're
child
just,
thing.
we're family.
Yeah.
And we're just, like, one group.
Right.
You know, we move, you know, we just.
Yeah, it's like the group versus the individual almost. It's like there's the larger group and ideologies but then it's just really you or you and your family, and it's a much different thing you're dealing with. And I think it's a microcosm sort of everything we're talking about, where, you know, the idea of a child being away, because as a child, there's no like a way you're wanting to be seen in the world. You're just doing what you do because you're a kid. You get in trouble for something, you get in enough trouble, you don't do it again. But it doesn't change the way you felt that made you do the thing in the first place. So it's like this purified, simplified version of all of this. You know, you're a kid, you're just doing what you're doing, and you are told, and in your case, extremely hypocritically or in many ways horribly sort of forced to become aware of the fact that that's not okay, you know. But in reality, A, what the fuck is okay, and B, it's like you're a kid, you know. And I think that's sort of when this shit sort of starts, and kids aren't aware of this shit at all, you know, and it's things like that make them aware of this in the first place. And, you know, like we're saying, it kind of is.
Well, and that was kind of just like my, you know, as a very young child, I was like, wow, you know, like, to me, the pinnacle of beauty was, you know, a Black woman. Like, that was like, Black was beautiful. Like, that was just like my, like, that's like beautiful. Like, if you want to draw a beautiful girl or woman, you know, in a picture, that's what I felt. And everybody around me was like, what in the world? Like, what? You know, like, it was in the 70s and 80s, you know, and so it was kind of like, huh? Like, where'd you come up? Because we didn't have a TV. We didn't have, you know, a lot of external input. So it was kind of like, that's weird. That's wrong. Like, that's, you know, like, no. And I literally remember, like, in kindergarten, like, the teacher being like, this is skin color, and this is, you know, it's a peach crayon. It's like, that doesn't, you know, like, that doesn't look pretty, as pretty to me as a brown crayon. And so this just kind of just like, okay, that sounds super simple, because it is simple, because I was a kid.
Yeah, you're a kid, yeah.
You know, like, it's, you know, but having an instinct that, oh, this is so beautiful, that's just like, that comes from a very innocent, childish place. And to have that then, you know, be punished for that, there were lots of nights where I just cried myself to sleep, because I felt like something was really wrong with me, and I didn't know what it was. Like, I didn't know how to fix it, because it just seemed like things that came natural to me were not okay. But at the same time, that's still how I felt. So there was this dissonance of me versus, you know, parents and my older brother, and, you know, the peers. I never fit in with my peers. I always got like straight A's, and I was MVP in different sports and stuff, because I just tried so hard to be accepted. And, you know, I worked since I was 9 years old. I bought my own clothes and shoes, because I didn't, you know, I was raised poor, and I was going to get no Nike shoes or anything like that, you know, bought for me. So I would pick berries in the mountains, and I would just like work so hard to earn enough money to buy some name brand things so that I would be accepted at school. And it just was never enough, you know. So then as an adult, after my divorce, is really when I felt like I healed a lot of that. I, you know, went to a lot of therapy, and went to a lot of, kind of just, you know, surrounded myself with healthy friends, like, got rid of the toxic stuff in my life, stopped speaking to my parents, you know, like, just, you know, got rid of all of that negative energy and really started building in a healthy sense. And so to have that, you know, the people who have perpetrated so much pain on you as a kid come back and basically get the world on their side.
Yeah.
You know, and then throw all that power of, you know, millions of people against you, was, I mean, it was devastating. I really believe if I was not a mother, I would not be here, because it was too painful to be worth living just for myself. Like, but for my kids, I had to press on because I didn't want them having any more pain from losing me. So it was kind of like, but just to have healed from those childhood traumas, and then to have them leveraged so powerfully. Like, I did not see that ever happen. I did not expect that was ever going to happen on such a massive scale.
It is. Yeah. I mean, it is disturbing in the idea that those were your parents and that's what they were like. And then to have, regardless of the fucking truth, actually, to have them be the people that the public is like, yeah, listen to them. Like, regardless of what they're saying, through your eyes, that's just like gotta be an extreme source of pain. I mean, not that you need to talk about it, but as someone who's empathizing, that seems very sort of like a twist of the dagger that was already in you, at that point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I felt like it was not just for me, but also for my sister, who I was advocating for, the loss of justice for her, which is why they did it in the first place. Like, they had to discredit me nationally in order to shut down her case in Colorado. Right. So I was a key witness. So it was like, a huge loss for her. It was a huge twist of the dagger for Isaiah, because when I sued them for child abuse and won full custody of him, like that, we kind of felt like, oh, we'd never have to see them again.
Yeah.
Like the lines have been drawn in the sand forever, and we're done. Like, we have emancipated. It's kind of like there's 3 kids over here, and there are 3 kids that still remain, kind of under their psychological control or manipulation. And I feel like to some extent, that became my focus, like surviving, to make sure that Esther was okay, making sure Isaiah was okay, and he got through it, making sure, of course, Franklin was okay. And then I was 1 month pregnant at the time. So Jeez. That also became like a big focus for me. And I think that was a real gift. I mean, as crazy as, having an unexpected pregnancy coincide with it was still like I was losing, my jobs, my students, like a lot of the communities I was directing my nurturing, advocating energy toward. I was losing those connections. And so I was able to kind of have a focal point for, nurturing. I had to take care of my body because I was pregnant, like not for me, even just for the sake of, of Langston, as it turned out. But yeah, so a lot of things were very crazy and have been interesting to just, evolve and grow through. But I feel like we're either evolving and growing, or we're, like, you can't just stand in place in life. You're either, dying internally or externally, or you're evolving and growing. And I chose to grow and maintain. In some days it didn't feel like growth. It just felt like survival.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, but that is growth. And I think that also just from where I'm looking, and I know we should wrap up, we've gone over already, but this has been great. But from where I'm looking, it's like, regardless of anything, I mean, to come from the parents that you came from and to be the kind of parent that you are, just from the documentary alone, it's a very moving, and I think that that's something that really stands out of your story, regardless of anything else. And I think that that's sort of its own inspiring thing. And I just wanted to say that, before we go.
Well, thank you. I think back to what we talked about at the beginning about, undoing racism and implementing justice. I mean, I feel like that's been my life, like undoing harmful things, and harmful thought patterns and things that I knew I did not want to be. And then replacing those behaviors and thought patterns with healthy parenting strategies. And, I didn't learn by example how to parent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I know what not to do.
Sure. That's helpful as well. Yeah.
So,
yeah, totally.
That's a starting point. And then I've taken a lot of parenting classes. I've taken a lot of parenting classes, not because I felt like I couldn't, just because I wanted to have other information and input into, I felt like I just wanted so badly to not repeat what I was raised with that I had to get some fresh ideas and learn. So I think that's what America needs to do at the core is unlearn and then replace and learn, new behaviors around justice, equity, and inclusion when it comes to race and culture. So
yeah. Well, Rachel, thank you so much. I mean, I think this was very informative, and I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. If there's anything else you want to say or talk about, I mean, I know we covered so much, but feel free to add anything before we hop off here. Okay.
No, I mean, I guess, I'll just throw in a little plug for my website if anybody's ever interested in viewing my art or purchasing a signed book or anything like that. But it's just racheldolezal.com.
Cool.
So,
cool.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a good place to go.
Good. Yeah, everybody go there. Everybody that's listening, go there. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate your time, and I'll let you know when we post the episode.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Bye.